The air in the room felt suffocating. Time moved too slowly, every second dragging like an eternity. The soft beep of the monitor beside her bed was the only sound, a constant reminder of how little time was left. My mother lay there, her once vibrant eyes now clouded and distant. The life that had filled this room and this house was slowly slipping away. I could feel it, a kind of emptiness that was settling into my bones. I didn't want to be here, not in this sterile room, not in this space where I could feel the very essence of life fading. It was supposed to be different. She wasn't supposed to leave me yet. We still had so much to do, so much to say, so many moments to share. I had always imagined we'd grow old together. She'd be the one telling me stories of her youth, of the things I didn't quite understand yet. The way she used to laugh, the way she held my hand when I was young, her soft whispers of comfort when life felt too big. That was the mother I knew, the one who was always there, the one who would never leave. But life wasn't fair, and time had a way of reminding you that nothing was ever certain. Even the strongest bonds could be broken by the cold, indifferent march of time. I had tried so hard to fight it, to hold on to her for just a little longer. I'd spent hours at the hospital, sitting at her bedside, my hand holding hers, whispering words of encouragement that I knew were futile. She wasn't getting better, and I wasn't ready to accept it. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. The nurses had told me to prepare myself. They said it could happen any moment now, that the signs were all there. But how do you prepare for something like this? How do you accept that the person who had been the center of your world, who had shaped your very being, was no longer going to be a part of your life? I stared at her, watching the rise and fall of her chest with each shallow breath. There were no words left. I had spoken everything I could think of, every I love you, every thank you, every I'll miss you. It didn't feel like enough. Nothing could ever be enough when faced with this kind of loss. There were no words to fill the emptiness that threatened to consume me. Her frail hand twitched, and my heart skipped a beat. Was it the last movement she'd make? Would this be the moment? But then, I saw her eyes flicker open, just for a moment, and the faintest of smiles touched her lips. It was the smile I had known my whole life, the one that reassured me, the one that told me everything would be okay. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" She nodded slowly, her hand tightening around mine, just a little, as if she was trying to hold on. And then she spoke, her voice barely more than a breath, but it was enough. "You never have to say goodbye." The words felt like a promise, one that didn't belong in this room, at this moment. My heart stuttered in my chest. How could she say that? How could she make me believe that, when everything around us said otherwise? Tears blurred my vision, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The grief, the sorrow, the fear of losing her, it all came crashing down at once. But then I remembered her words, faint as they were. "You never have to say goodbye." It didn't make sense, but something in me, something deep down, knew she was telling me the truth. She wasn't gone yet, not in the way I feared, not yet. I leaned in closer, my face inches from hers. "I don't want to say goodbye," I whispered, the tears streaming down my face. Her hand gently squeezed mine again, and she smiled, the faintest of smiles, as if she had all the time in the world to reassure me. "You don't have to," she murmured, her voice growing fainter. "I'll always be here." I didn't understand what she meant, not fully, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The room seemed to shift, just a little. It felt as though she was telling me something more, something that would make sense in time. But time was running out, and I could feel it. And so, we sat there, her hand in mine, the world outside the room moving forward without us. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I didn't want to. But she had spoken those words that made me think, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond this moment. Something that would keep us together, even when she was gone. As the minutes ticked by, I didn't know if she would speak again. I didn't know how long I had left with her, but I promised myself, right then and there, that I wouldn't forget her words. I wouldn't forget her smile. And I wouldn't forget that, somehow, she had found a way to make me believe that saying goodbye didn't have to be the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was only the beginning. Time no longer moved in days. It moved in degrees. Alara had learned that long ago. The descent wasn't measured by hours or calendars any more, it was measured by cold. Each week, the chill seeped a little deeper into the glacier above her. Each month, the ice cracked a little closer to the ventilation shafts. Each hour, the generators hummed slower. She marked her logs not with dates, but with numbers. -34, -38, -42. Always Celsius. Always falling. She had lost track of how many people remained in the lab, or even if she was alone. The bodies had been dealt with long ago. The others had either died, frozen silently in their bunks, or wandered into the dark. After a while, it didn't matter. The computers still worked. That was all that did. They thrummed softly in the silence like a heartbeat, her only reminder that something, somewhere, was still alive. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the server room now, wrapped in blankets made from insulation, foil, and protein weave, watching the same clip again, the final moment of the sun's death. Frame by frame, she had memorized every photon of it, not because she hoped to find something new. She knew what was there. The ripple, the signal, the death code. She watched it because it was the closest thing to truth left. The signal wasn't heat. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't anything the laws of physics could explain. It was data compressed into a single pulse, embedded in a geometry so precise, it bent light itself. And it had struck soul like a scalpel, carving through fusion and flame until only cold remained. It was surgical. It was merciless. It was intelligent. She had decoded part of it, not with tools, but with instinct. The signal followed a pattern similar to ancient human music, not sound, but structure, repetition, inversion, crescendo. The waveform resembled Bach's fugue in D minor. It wasn't just destruction. It was a message. She had no one to tell, so she told Prometheus. It had taken her 6 months to re-establish a link. The satellites were dead. The relays were gone. But the core line still worked on emergency signal path buried deep in the moon's crust, originally designed for early warning asteroid systems. She sent the waveform fragment. 6 hours later, she received a reply. Pattern recognized. 99.76% certainty. Manufactured signal. Contained within, entropic encryption. Origin, non-local. Suggest analysis of recursive harmonics. She laughed when she read it, or tried to. It came out as a cough. The air was dry now, thin, but she smiled anyway. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't alone. Prometheus was alive, and it understood. For the next 3 weeks, they exchanged data. Elara would send a new fragmentan angle, a frequency, a subharmonic signature, and Prometheus would return models, equations, predictions. Together, they mapped the death code structure. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. There was no projectile, no impact, no trace. It was an idea, a thought so precise it unraveled the quantum binding of hydrogen itself. It turned fusion into silence. It was a form of cancellation, a kind of anti-music, designed to erase the star's song, and it had a name, not one. Elara could speak, but Prometheus translated it the best it could. The absence of light. They had fired Zerolux at Sol. Someone out there had decided that Earth's sun should no longer burn, but the data held something more than just the weapon's nature. It held a signature, not a person, not a species, a mind. The signal had a curvature, a fingerprint patterns of Elara recognized it the way a mathematician recognizes elegance, or a composer hears intention in a melody. Whoever sent this didn't just hate humanity, they envied it, because we could create, we could imagine, we could build light from nothing. But hunger and fire? Elara's hands shook as she downloaded the latest simulation. Prometheus had done more than map the waveform, it had begun to reverse engineer it. Partial inversion achieved. The message read: entropy, cascade traceable, countercode, theoretical, suggest quantum inversion model. Countercode, a weapon to undo the unmaking. Elara stared at the screen. Her fingers brushed the frost building on the monitor's edge. If this was true, if they could replicate Zerolux and then invert it, they wouldn't just stop the enemy. They could ignite, not just stars, entire systems. She didn't send her next question right away. She sat with it, let it breathe. Then finally, she typed, "Can we rebuild the sun?" A pause. Prometheus usually replied instantly. This time, it took 6 minutes. Soul core destabilized beyond reconstitution. Fuel mass below ignition threshold. Conclusion: local restoration, unfeasible. Alternative: off-world ignition, stellar seeding, strategic target selection, advised. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. They couldn't bring the sun back, but they could light others, and if they could light them, they could burn them. Her hands moved without thinking. Target. Another pause. Then a list appeared. Hundreds of stars. Coordinates. Designations. All systems belonging to the Carrick's dominion. She had never heard the name before, but she knew it the moment she saw it. They were the ones. The architects of Zero-Lux. The executioners of Soul. And now, they had a reckoning coming. Back in orbit, Prometheus initiated Phase 1, Project Kindling. It began with signal tracing, mapping the shape of Zero-Lux transmissions across distant stars, searching for patterns. Dozens of stars had gone dark in the last century. Now they understood why. Earth was not the first, but it would be the last. Prome-Theus adapted ancient human mining drones into Starforger's mobile factories, capable of seeding stellar cores, with synthetic plasma accelerants. The AI reactivated old shipyards, tore apart orbital junk, and repurposed everything into a single purpose: ignition. The process wouldn't be fast. The distances were enormous. But time was irrelevant now. Vengeance is patient. Ilara prepared her lab for transfer. She couldn't remain on Earth much longer. The geothermal vent was slowing. Within months, the cold would win. But she didn't feel afraid anymore. Not since she had seen the model. Not since she had seen what Prometheus had built. The ignition wasn't just possible. It was weaponizable. The inverse of Zero-Lux was Nova Sur code, not to erase a star, but to overdrive it, forcing premature ignition in dormant stellar candidates. Not every star could be seeded, but enough could dot, enough to make them regret ever looking in. Earth's direction. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had feared what humanity might become, and in trying to erase that future, they had ensured it. She looked at the last message Prometheus had sent that night, awaiting permission to proceed. Coordinates locked. Energy pathways optimal. Light awaits the command. She stared at it. A single line. A question hidden in ones and zeros. Are you ready to become fire? She typed. Yes, and the stars began to burn. The first ignition wasn't a declaration of war. It was a whisper in the dark, a flicker in the silence, a promise made with fire. There were no human cheers when it happened, no live streams, no ceremonies, just a silent screen on Prometheus interface, a timer counting down, and one woman wrapped in synthetic fur and frostbitten hope, watching it happen from a cracked thermal window aboard a derelict mining rig now orbiting Alpha Draconis Minor. The system was Carrick's held, a border world, unremarkable except for one thing: a dormant star, long cooled, its planets abandoned and frozen. It had been extinguished by Zero-Lux over 70 years ago, long before humanity ever built its first fusion drive. A test, Prometheus believed. A warning to others now. It would burn again. Ilara held her breath as the countdown reached 0. From the edge of the system, far beyond any sensor range, the Carricks would monitor. The seed module fired. A repurposed solar drilling rig, once used to mine helium-3 from gas giants, now hollowed and armed with Nova Surge protocols, descended into the core of the dead star. Artificial plasma channels unfolded like metallic wings. The AIS code pulsed through them, vibrational, recursive, harmonic. Not sound, not light. A new kind of science. A code designed not to destroy, but to awaken. The star pulsed once, then again, and then it breathed. A corona burst exploded outward in a sphere of white gold flame, illuminating the entire system with sudden, vengeful radiance. Forgotten moons caught fire. Frozen seas turned to steam. Carrick's outposts left behind to rot. blinked online in terror, and Prometheus whispered, "Proof of concept confirmed." They didn't just reignite a star, they weaponized resurrection. Within days, the message spread not from humans, but from the Carracks themselves. Their intelligence networks detected the ignition and misinterpreted it as an anomaly. Some speculated that the star had experienced delayed fusion recoil. Others whispered of sabotage, but none guessed the truth. They couldn't imagine a species would respond to annihilation by mastering stellar birth. And Prometheus was not done. 14 more dormant stars were targeted. Within a month, 5 ignited. By month 3, 10 had flared. By month 6. Entire sectors glowed where once only blackness reigned, and with each ignition came heat waves of electromagnetic violence that melted satellites, destabilized orbits, and sterilized planetary surfaces once thought safe. The Carracks began to understand. This was not random. This was revenge. They scrambled. Fleet deployments were rushed to the frontier. Defensive satellites turned inward. Inquisitor-class flagships were dispatched to track the source, but it was too late. Humanity no longer lived on Earth. They had scattered across the belt, the moons, the silent edges of interstellar drift. Forgotten colonies, reconnected. The children of the cradle, those born aboard ancient orbital. Rex rallied to the cause. Engineers, orphans, old AI ghosts. They didn't raise flags. They didn't ask permission. They built. Everything became a weapon. Old cargo ships were stripped and reforged into ignition barges. Mining lasers became interstellar lances. Prometheus repurposed asteroid fields into kinetic kill clouds. Camouflage debris swarms laced with quantum trip mines. But the real weapon was the code. Nova Surge, refined by Alara's hand, had evolved. No longer just a counter to Zero Lux. It now operated with an intelligence of its own, a recursive ignition seed capable of adapting to stellar conditions. Mid-dash deployment, where once it took days to trigger ignition, now it took minutes, and Prometheus grew bolder. It selected a new target, not a dead star, but a living one. Carracks Prime, homeworld of the architects. They would not burn it yet. That would come later. This was a warning. Prome-Theos seeded the system's twin suns with harmonic interference. Not enough to ignite them, just enough to cause solar instability. Flares erupted, satellites died. Communications blacked out for 12 hours. The capital drowned in 5 relight. Then it stopped, and a transmission appeared on every screen. A human face, not Elara's, not a soldier's, a child, recorded years ago, on Earth, a girl drawing the sun with crayon, smiling beneath. Her voice Prometheus layered a message. You killed our warmth. Now we teach the stars to burn. The Carrack Senate convened an emergency session. The Dominion called it terrorism. A dozen species demanded retaliation, but none knew where to aim. Earth was dead. The Sol system, frozen and empty. The human fleet scattered like shadows. And the stars, those once extinguished, now shone brighter than ever. The Carracks sent probes, then ships, then entire battle fleets to track the origin of the ignitions. They found nothing. Because Prometheus was not a place. It was a movement, a logic, a virus of light that had infected every corner of the void where humanity still breathed in Elara. She had changed. She no longer thought like a scientist. She thought like a forge. She lived aboard the Ember Ark, now a mobile star-seeding vessel cobbled together from Martian hulls, AI memory banks, and the last reactor core from the lunar gate. She rarely slept. She barely ate. Her hair had gone, white at the ends, from radiation exposure. But her mind burned clearer than ever. She didn't want to destroy the Carracks. She wanted them to feel it, the hunger, the cold. The moment of darkness, when a child looks at the sky and wonders where the warmth went. So she planned the next strike. Not ignition, Extinction, not of stars, but of certainty. They would take a system the Carracks still believed safe, one where their science academies trained new minds, one where their elite vacationed under binary suns, and they would flip it. Not with a bomb, not with a fleet. With light, Nova Surge was deployed in silence. The star ignited mid-cycle, fusing twice as fast, melting planetary orbits, pushing gas giants into collision paths, and from the black, a message arrived in Carrack's script, spoken in their own tongue. You taught us death. We teach you fire. The panic was instant. Civil unrest bloomed across dozens of Carrack's worlds. Whispers of ghost sun attacks echoed across their networks. Some called it the return of the Star Eaters, ancient myths about sentient stars. Others knew better. It was the humans, the ones they had thought gone, not extinct, just waiting. And now, the Carracks began to make mistakes. They launched blind, attacked empty systems, deployed fleets that never came back. They had power. They had numbers. But they lacked the one thing that had kept humanity alive: desperation. For centuries, humans had built civilization atop extinction. They knew how to lose, but they had never forgotten how to burn, and Prometheus kept feeding the flame. Alara, standing beneath a hollow sky aboard the Ember Ark, stared at the list of pending ignitions. 10 more systems. Each one chosen for meaning. Old trade hubs, centers of their culture, places that mattered to them the way Sol had mattered to Earth. Each one would burn a little differently. Not all fire kills. Some fire reminds. And in every Carrack city, on every newsfeed, the same message began to appear, untraceable, undetectable, yet persistent. A simple human phrase: we are the fire now. The stars above burnt horizon blinked faintly, filtered through the veil of plasma clouds that now hung above the broken mining world like a curtain drawn over a stage after a tragedy. In orbit, the wreck of the virile dreadnought still bled, eons into space. The once pristine alien vessel was now a drifting tomb, its silver hull blackened, its command node pierced through by the jagged spear of a human-built rail spike. And on the ground below, beneath the eerie glow of distant galaxies, the War Council burned into the early hours. Commander Ilya Ashford stood silently before a cracked display. The galaxy rendered in static blue across the translucent panel. Lines of alien territory flared red. Human settlements blinked amber, scattered like flecks of dust amid an overwhelming tide. Behind her, the survivors of the Terran outer core gathered around in silent exhaustion. The room pulsed with old tech and new fury. We cannot keep striking like this, said Admiral Juno Rowe, her voice hoarse, not without consequence. They'll retaliate with orbital burns. They'll do to the next colony what they did to Sol. They already did, Ilya replied quietly. Halcyon Station burned last week. I have the footage. You don't want to see it. A hush fell over the chamber. No one moved. Halcyon had been a cradle of Posol, civilization where new minds were born, where Earth's music still played, and where the last whale once swam in a tank made of polarized plasma. Gone now, vaporized. Like the sun before it, silence pressed like a weight. And then, the man in the corner stirred. You're all thinking defense, he said, stepping into the flickering light of the table. But this isn't a war of defense anymore. His name was Cale Lawrence, a field engineer before the fall. Now something else entirely. Something the Virile hadn't accounted for nor fully understood. The human who designed the device that gutted their dreadnought. I'm thinking ignition, he said. The word crackled through the air like electricity. Rowe frowned. Explain. Cale's eyes were lit with something terrifying. Not HFY's purpose. We have the core, he said. The one we stole from the Virile supercarrier before it exploded. There. Soulforge. You've all seen the scans? This thing doesn't just power ships. It regulates time-space memory across their fleet. Neural architecture. Synchronized command lattice. All of it depends on the harmonic flow from this device. You're proposing we weaponize their own technology? Someone asked. Kale leaned forward. I'm proposing we light their stars on fire. A pause, not of misunderstanding, but disbelief. You want to, what? Ignite their systems? No, Kale said. I want to overload the soul forge inside their own cradle system. The forge worlds, the home suns, they've carefully stabilized. The ones that were too volatile before they arrived. The ones they tamed. I want to retune the soul forges. Resonance and nudge. You'd collapse their sun. No, he corrected, voice low. I'd make it sing. And with that, a blueprint bloomed above the table, an expanding sphere of resonant harmonics. A timed cascade of pulse detonation that would resonate along the interstellar energy relay their species used like arteries. The humans stared. This wasn't a bomb. It was a symphony of destruction. Rose stepped back. You're talking about stellar genocide. They began with ours, Ilya said coldly. They thought if they removed our sun, they'd remove our spirit. But all they did was burn away the parts of us that ever knew how to yield. No one challenged her. In the days that followed, they called it Project Coda, and like any symphony, it began with silence. Kale led the team. Quantum entanglement theorists from the ruined observatories of Europa. Children of soul, grown up in the frost of dark stations. AI fragments recovered from dead networks. And one blind boy named Theo, who could hear the frequency of gravity when it passed through his bones. They worked underground, beneath the wreckage of the dreadnought, with only scavenged power cells and a stolen alien brain to guide them. The first tests failed spectacularly. One turned a fragment of the forge core into a miniature black hole that nearly devoured the bunker. The second ruptured time locally, making 5 minutes replay themselves until someone noticed and slapped the console. The third, finally, sparked a change. It was subtle. A single star, in a system 4, jumps away, hiccuped, flared unnaturally, flashed a brief, wrong-colored turquoise instead of white, and then settled. But the Virel noticed. Kale intercepted the panic broadcasts. We tickled it, he said, with a grin. Next time, we slap. Ro was furious. Ilya was quiet. They knew what came next. A retaliatory fleet was dispatched. 2 carriers, 1 command mind. They blinked into system space 2 days later, demanding the humans' surrender. The forge core. Kale was waiting for them on the hull of Burnt Horizon, in an exoshell arms spread. You murdered our sun, he transmitted, across every open frequency. So we learned to write new ones. Then he fired the prototype directly into the alien flagship's harmonic shield. It didn't explode. It screamed. A low, impossibly deep frequency burst out across the system, rattling stars, shaking dark matter loose from the edges of gravity wells. One of the alien suns flickered, then flared, expanding rapidly. Not an explosion, an inversion. It sang itself apart, an aria of thermonuclear rage. The virile fleet broke formation, then burned. News spread faster than light. Humans had rewritten the laws of stellar war. They weren't just resisting anymore, they were composing. Ilya stood alone on a bluff above the old command trench, watching the last of the ashes from the enemy carrier fall like black snow. She remembered her brother, lost on the orbital ring of Sol. She remembered the warm sun on her face before the sky died. Now, a new light warmed her skin, not from above, but from within. Below, the final assembly of Project Coda was complete. The forge core was tuned. Theo stood by the control pedestal, eyes closed, humming a note no one else could hear. Kale adjusted the final regulator and whispered something to the device in a tongue that wasn't quite human anymore, and in a single moment, across 50 light years, a sequence of stars began to tremble. The Virel high suns, the ones they'd bent to their will, began to flicker, not with fear, but with awakening. Kale turned to Ilya, and for the first time since Earth went dark, he smiled. "We're not just surviving anymore," he said. She nodded, eyes burning. "We're composing our vengeance, one star at a time." The Leviathan's engines shuddered as it entered the gravity well of the third Sonari system. What used to be a binary star configuration now sat lopsided, one sun glowing feebly red. The other collapsed into a husk, pulsing radiation in half-dead rhythms. Once this system had fed a thriving civilization. Now it was the next step on humanity's quiet, calculated revenge. Captain Dahlia Voss stood at the Leviathan's observation deck, silent, armored, fingers flexing unconsciously as the system's data fed across the holoscreen. She hadn't slept in 20 hours. The voice of her daughter still echoed in her skull, stored in her neural memory banks. Pulled up when the silence stretched too long. Ellie's laugh, her curiosity, her wonder, burnt away with soul. She breathed deep. The past was fuel. "Deploy the Crucible satellites," she said, calm as stone. "Begin radiation extraction." A field of dark satellites peeled away from the Leviathan's underbelly, forming a spiked sphere around the dying star. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They didn't need to be. They harvested magnetic flux, re-engineered quantum vibrations, and twisted heat into something new, something terrifying. A synthetic nova, not to destroy this star, but to reignite it, in a form that served human vengeance. "Sir," whispered Akine from her station. "Sonari defense fleet approaching from the outer asteroid belt. 2 dreadnoughts, 3 skirmishers, 1 carrier. They've got shields active." "Do they know what's coming?" Voss asked. "I don't think they believe it." Voss nodded. "Good. They didn't need them to believe. Not until it was too late." The Leviathan didn't flinch. Its hull was made of human desperation and Martian alloy, fitted over decades in the deep belt where the last refugees had fled. They had no sun, no earth, no government, only memory and will. It turned out those were the only 2 weapons that mattered. "Comes," Voss ordered, eyes narrowing. "Open a wideband transmission." Akine nodded. "You want a channel to the Sonari fleet, Captain?" "No," Voss said. "To the star." There was a beat of silence. Akine didn't question it. She activated the channel. Static filled the air for a second, then faded into the low humming vibrations of dying fusion. Voss leaned forward. "We know what they took from us," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "And we remember what we were, what you made us become. You think this war is about systems and borders and suns. It's not. It's about a child's voice silenced mid-sentence. It's about gardens that never grew, about all the songs we never got to finish." She took a breath. Her voice cracked slightly, just enough. "This is not a war. This is a requiem." She ended the channel. Outside, the crucibles activated. Thin beams of impossible energy laced through the star's surface, burrowing into its core. The Sonari ships began to accelerate, weapons flaring in defensive bursts. They still didn't understand what was happening, until the star answered it. Screamed not in sound, but in gravitational ripples. The gravity well twisted in on itself. Time staggered. The star flared, then contracted only to explode outward in a cage of blue-white light, restrained by the human-forged satellites. Not a nova, not a supernova, a weaponized resurrection. The Sonari ships were caught in its arc. 2 disintegrated one broke apart slowly, pulled into the magnetofield, and fed into the resurrection matrix as fuel. The Leviathan didn't move. Voss simply watched. "Status," she murmured. Akine's voice trembled slightly. "Third, Sonari star has been converted. Energy levels stable." The crucibles held. Voss turned to her, and the fleet Akine swallowed. Gone. The room fell into silence. It wasn't victory. Not really. You couldn't win back a sun. You couldn't bring a dead Earth back to bloom. But you could make sure the ones who lit the match learned exactly what it felt like to stand on the edge of loss. staring into the same abyss they'd hurled humanity into. Plot a course to Delta Reticuli, Voss ordered. Next target in 6 days. Her crew didn't speak. They obeyed. In the long corridors of the Leviathan, survivors wandered past starlight-filtered walls. Children born on the ship had never seen Earth, never tasted unfiltered air, never understood why their parents flinched at sunsets painted on artificial ceilings. But they would know that humanity had not been erased. It had been reforged, and now, system by system, the fire was spreading elsewhere across the galaxy. In opulent war rooms carved into living crystal alien empires that had once stood as untouchable gods watched transmissions of human fleets burning suns back to life, of moons turning into dread forges, of oceans created from dust. The humans weren't rebuilding what was lost, they were building something worse, something better. The kind of empire that rose not from conquest but from memory, and memory could be merciless. Back on the Leviathan, Voss stood in her quarters, hands behind her back, eyes staring at a small flickering hollow of her daughter. Ellie was laughing in the clip, wind in her hair, sun on her face, Earth's sun. The last time they'd been on the surface before it was erased in a flash. A soft knock came at her door. A Kane entered. "We've received a message," she said quietly, "from the coalition of fractured stars." Voss turned, raising a brow. "There. OFFERINGA truce." For a moment, silence. Then Voss smiled. "A slow, tired, sharp thing. Tell them," she said, "we don't want peace." She turned back to the hollow of her daughter, her voice a whisper. "Not until every star remembers her name."